Good morning, everyone. Virgo here. It is September 12th, 2019, and welcome to Snoop4Truth. Today we're going to continue on with the Deborah Tavares series with the Agenda 21 hoax. Now, this is very interesting, and I know a lot of you have already commented that you would like some additional information with regards to this. So we're going to be taking you through this all the way to the end, and Snoop has done a tremendous amount of investigating on this particular subject. So here we go with the Agenda 21 hoax. The Agenda 21 hoax is based on two specific documents. The Agenda 21 document itself was a real United Nations document, so the hoax is not the document itself. Agenda 21 was merely a suggestion which the United States Senate rejected. And under the United States Constitution, Senate approval is required for the United States to enter into a treaty or to make federal law. We can take you over to a website called annenbergclassroom.org and take you to Article 2, Section 2 real quick. Here we are at the Annenberg Guide to the United States Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, where the text reads, "The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, and of the militia of the several states. When called into the actual service of the United States, he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in the cases of impeachment. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The President shall have power to fill up all vacancies, and that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session." If you want additional information or you want to go into reading the actual meaning, which puts it more in layman's terms for you, then I will make sure that this is linked to the description of this video. Having said that, and now knowing that Agenda 21 was never a federal law, Agenda 21 never became a treaty and never became a law, and that means that Agenda 21 is completely irrelevant in the United States. The other document involved in this hoax is a simulated land use map in which Deborah Tavares fraudulently calls the Agenda 21 map. This simulated land use map is fake and had nothing to do with Agenda 21 in the first place. Instead, it related to the proposed Biological Diversity Treaty, something different from Agenda 21, which the United States Senate also rejected, by the way. So that proposed treaty and its fake map are also completely irrelevant in the United States. Deborah Tavares knew the truth all along, but nevertheless decided to lie about it anyway in order to incite fear, hatred, and violence against innocent Americans. Let's take a listen to a few different areas in a few different videos that you will find in the description along with their timestamps to what Deborah has to say in her own words.
The word climate change, UN Agenda 21, and 2030 have a new frontier of climate change, and it's called resilience as well. Our research team found documents exchanged between the California Public Utility Commission and Pacific Gas and Electric. And I'm going to let you look at those documents. You can find that in a shorter YouTube called Agenda 21, the plans to burn up Northern California. But the longer 2-hour version is the second plan to burn up Northern California, which has not quite yet happened. So I caution you, we have been told by our governor here in California that this is a new role. And the smart cities, the UN Agenda 21 of the human settlement zones, as I call them, are trauma-based mind control encampments for total enslavement of our minds. This is mind capture. This is the goal. A one mind, a global brain. Sustained attack and pressure. Another aspect of this warfare involves what smart cities represent. Smart cities are the corralling of the people into prison zones, because keeping in mind, smart cities are based upon the idea that we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is fraudulent science. And yet policies are being written in all of our corrupt administrative levels, and all the people that we assume represent us whom do not, are putting forth policies of corrupt, falsified science and creating new global markets and corralling all of us at the same time. Now, why I'm bringing up smart cities is going to follow into this story, Jeff, because attrition warfare is a clever exploitation of the mobility of the enemy to strengthen and to reduce the enemy's strength and make their strength irrelevant. And what they mean by that is finding an enemy means locating the enemy in both time and space. Fixing the enemy is reducing his freedom of action, usually by immobilizing or suppressing their abilities. So this is what smart cities are. They're suppressing our abilities. They want us out of cars. They want us onto bikes, where we'll be highly positioned to face all of the psychotronic weapons and all of the other weaponized systems of economy, etc., in these cities. So while I just spoke about smart cities, I certainly want everyone to hear this through the use of frequencies to secure all of us. Normal.
So let's talk about the hoax. In the Agenda 21 hoax, Deborah Tavares fraudulently claims that the Agenda 21 document constitutes proof that the United Nations is using diabolical methods like fires and laser beams from satellites in space to force us out of our rural and suburban homes and into increasingly smaller, densely packed, overpopulated kill cities or smart cities in furtherance of the planned extinction of mankind. But her claims about this document are not so. The Agenda 21 document was written by the world's leading environmental scientists, not by PG&E, the Rothschilds, or the Rockefellers. Agenda 21 was first presented to the public at the Earth Summit, an environmental conference in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in 1992. The idea behind Agenda 21 was that the survival of mankind on Earth is dependent on the survival of the environment of the Earth. By saving the environment, we can save mankind. So Agenda 21 was intended to prevent the extinction of mankind, exactly the opposite to what Deborah Tavares claims in her hoax, to the effect that Agenda 21 is a plan to cause the extinction of mankind. The Agenda 21 document suggested that we reduce the rate at which we deplete our natural resources to the same rate at which they can recover from being depleted, called sustainable development. If the United States Senate had ratified or approved Agenda 21, it would have protected most of the remaining forests, exactly the opposite to what Deborah Tavares claims in her hoax, to the effect that the United Nations intentionally burned the forests of California in furtherance of Agenda 21, which was actually intended to preserve those very forests from destruction in the first place. If the United States Senate had ratified or approved Agenda 21, it would have also reduced drought and ensured an adequate supply of fresh water not contaminated by sewage, which is exactly the opposite of what Deborah Tavares claims in her hoax, to the effect that droughts and the shortage of fresh water not contaminated by sewage were engineered in furtherance of Agenda 21, which was actually intended to prevent those very hardships in the first place. Agenda 21 is completely irrelevant in the United States. Agenda 21 was only a suggestion that member nations were permitted but not required to adopt for themselves. While President Bush symbolically signed the Agenda 21 document, the United States Senate rejected Agenda 21, and under the United States Constitution, Senate approval is required for the United States to enter into a treaty or to make a federal law. Again, if you recall, we just went over the second paragraph on the Annenberg Classroom document, Section 2, Article 2, Section 2, rather, so that you guys could see for yourselves that it's necessary to have Senate's approval. So Agenda 21 is not a treaty, it's not the law, and it cannot be and is not enforced anywhere in the United States. So Agenda 21 is completely irrelevant in the United States. The fifth paragraph here sums it up perfectly. This document will be located in the description below. This is the southernpovertylawcenter.org website, and this is paragraph 5 on their Agenda 21 unsustainability and right-wing conspiracy documentation. Agenda 21 is not a treaty. It has no force of law, no enforcement mechanisms, no penalties, and no significant funding. It is not even a top-down recommendation, seeking instead to encourage communities around the world to come up with their own solutions for overpopulation, pollution, poverty, and resource depletion. It is a feel-good guide that cannot force anyone anywhere to do anything at all. But Deborah Tavares fraudulently conceals that critically important fact from her followers and listeners. Here is the real United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development document, which you will be able to locate in the description of this video. Let's just take a quick peek at what Section 2 says under Conservation and Management of Resources for Development. Protection of the atmosphere. Integrated approach to the planning and management of land resources. Combating deforestation. Managing fragile ecosystems. Combating desertification and drought, managing fragile ecosystems, sustainable mountain development, promoting sustainable agriculture and rural development, conservation of biological diversity, environmentally sound management of biotechnology, protection of the oceans, all kinds of seas, including enclosed and semi-enclosed seas and coastal areas, and the protection, rational use, and development of their living resources. Protection of the quality and supply of freshwater resources, application of integrated approaches to the development, management, and use of water resources. Environmentally sound management of toxic chemicals, including prevention of illegal international traffic in toxic and dangerous products. Environmentally sound management of hazardous wastes in hazardous wastes. Environmentally sound management of solid waste and sewage-related issues. And finally, safe and environmentally sound management of radioactive waste. And all of this, as you just saw, is on the very first page of Agenda 21. Here is the actual text of Agenda 21. Agenda 21, Chapter 11, Part 11.1 and 11.2, I'm going to read to you now about combating deforestation. A. Sustaining the multiple roles and functions of all types of forest lands, and woodlands. Basis for action. 11.1. There are major weaknesses in the policies, methods, and mechanisms adopted to support and develop the multiple ecological, economic, social, and cultural roles of trees, forests, and forest lands. Many developed countries are confronted with the effects of air pollution and fire damage on their forests. More effective measures and approaches are often required at the national level to improve and harmonize policy formation, planning, and programming, legislative measures and instruments, development patterns, participation of the general public, especially women and indigenous people, involvement of youth, roles of the private sector, local organizations, non-governmental organizations, and cooperatives, development of technical and multidisciplinary skills, and quality of human resources, forestry extension and public education, research capability and support, administrative structures and mechanisms, including intersectorial coordination, decentralization, and responsibility and incentive systems, and dissemination of information and public relations. This is especially important to ensure a rational and holistic approach to the sustainable and environmentally sound development of forests, the need for securing the multiple roles of forests and forest lands through adequate and appropriate institutional strengthening has been repeatedly emphasized in many of the reports, decisions, and recommendations of the FAO, ITTO, UNEP, the World Bank, IUCN, and other organizations. Objectives 11.2. The objectives of this program area are as follows. A. To strengthen forest-related national institutions to enhance the scope and effectiveness of activities related to the management, conservation, and sustainable development of forests, and to effectively ensure and sustainable utilization and production of forest goods and services in both the developed and the developing countries, by the year 2000 to strengthen the capacities and capabilities of national institutions to enable them to acquire the necessary knowledge for the protection and conservation of forests, as well as to expand their scope and correspondingly enhance the effectiveness of programs and activities related to the management and development of forests. And B, to strengthen and improve human, technical, and professional skills, as well as expertise and capabilities to effectively formulate and implement policies, plans, programs, research, and projects on management, conservation, and sustainable development of all types of forests and forest-based resources and forest lands, inclusive, as well as other areas from which forest benefits can be derived. And this is only the first two paragraphs of Section 11 of Agenda 21. What was that Deborah was saying once again about the burning, intentional burning of the California forests?
As well. Our research team found documents exchanged between the California Public Utility Commission and Pacific Gas and Electric. And I'm going to let you look at those documents. You can find that in a shorter YouTube called Agenda 21, the plans to burn up Northern California. But the longer 2-hour version is the second plan to burn up Northern California, which has not quite yet happened. So I caution you, we have been told by our governor here in California that this is a new normal.
You will note from the actual written words of Agenda 21 itself that I just read to you that there are no provision for incrementally reducing the areas already occupied by people to systematically drive them from their rural or suburban homes into increasingly smaller, densely packed, overpopulated, quote-unquote, kill cities or quote-unquote, smart cities in furtherance of the planned extinction of mankind. Let's talk about the Agenda 21 map. In addition to the Agenda 21 document itself, Deborah Tavares also claims to have discovered a simulated land use map, which she fraudulently claims constitutes proof that Agenda 21 is a plan which uses diabolical means like forest fires and laser beams from satellites in space to drive us out of our rural suburban homes and into increasingly smaller, densely packed, overpopulated kill cities or smart cities in furtherance of the planned extinction of mankind. Looking on your screen, you see this map, and here are some other versions of that map. Note that this simulated land use map makes no reference to Agenda 21 whatsoever, and that it refers instead to the Convention on Biological Diversity, something different from Agenda 21. Importantly, this simulated land use map also refers to the Wildlands Project, a mere suggestion from private environmentalists, which is not law and which has nothing to do with the United Nations. UN and US Man and Biosphere Program, various heritage programs, and NAFTA, which also has nothing to do with the United Nations. So I want to take a moment and address some proof and evidence with regards to the fact that the Convention on Biological Diversity, also known as Biodiversity Convention, is completely different than Agenda 21. What I've done is I've pulled up the actual Wikipedia pages on both of these things to show you there's a distinct difference between the two. So here is proof. The Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, known informally as Biodiversity Convention, is a multilateral treaty. The convention has three main goals, including the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. However, if you take a look at Agenda 21's page, you will see that it states Agenda 21 is a non-binding action plan of the United Nations with regard to sustainable development. It is a product of the Earth Summit, UN Conference on Environment and Development, held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992. Now, I will have these linked in the description should you guys decide you want to read about both of them on Wikipedia. I just wanted to make sure that you were absolutely aware of the fact that these two specific entities have nothing to do with one another. So, who created this map? Well, Dr. Michael S. Kaufman was a prolific writer, speaker, and property rights advocate. He often spoke at Liberty conferences sponsored by the John Birch Society. He was an environmental consultant, which is code for a lobbyist for large land-owning interests, land developers like Deborah Tavares, and large logging and mining corporations which profit by destroying the environment. Kaufman and his clients opposed land use regulations in general and environmental regulations in particular. And in 1994, when Congress was scheduled to vote on ratifying the proposed Biological Diversity Treaty, something different than Agenda 21, as explained, Kaufman created the subject simulated land use map to create opposition to the particular proposed treaty, not to Agenda 21. We can take a look at metabunk.org to confirm this in addition. And over here you see a picture, again, of Dr. Kaufman and information with regards to the map. And guess what? It worked. The United States Senate also rejected that proposed treaty. Here is a verbatim transcript of the actual Senate debate on the proposed treaty, which the Senate also rejected. This is the Congressional Record, Volume 140, Number 140, Friday, September 30th of 1994, from the Congressional Record online through the Government Printing Office, and this link will be in the description of this video. This is on opposing consideration of the Convention on Biodiversity. Kaufman conceded that his simulated land use map reflected what would be the resulting land use in the United States only if all of the proposed land use regulations listed at the top of his map became the law. The Wildlands Project, UN and US Man and Biosphere Program, various heritage programs, etc. But Agenda 21 itself was not among those proposed land use regulations reflected by Kaufman's map, because the United States Senate had already rejected Agenda 21, so Kaufman relied on other proposed land use regulations in creating his simulated land use map. Kaufman's simulated land use map was wildly exaggerated for propaganda purposes, both visually and verbally. Note the very first word on the map is simulated. Kaufman himself coined the phrase, quote, little or no human use, end quote, for propaganda purposes, a phrase which does not appear in any of his alleged source material. Note also that for propaganda purposes, Kaufman gave every tiny wildlife refuge on his map multiple, very wide migration routes, up to 50 miles wide, to and from neighboring wildlife refuges, as if such were actually required under these other land use proposals. This created the illusion that there would be much less land available for humans to use if these other land proposals ever became law. Kaufman intentionally designed and exaggerated his land use map, which had nothing at all to do with Agenda 21, to create the appearance that If all of these other proposed land use regulations were to become law, then there would be less land available for human use. Fact. It was Kaufman's exaggerated, simulated land use map, which has nothing to do with Agenda 21, that became the foundation for the original conspiracy theory that Agenda 21 will force us out of our rural and suburban homes and into overpopulated cities, even though that exaggerated, simulated land use map actually had nothing to do with Agenda 21 in the first place. But it was Deborah Tavares alone who came up with the new, improved, and more sensational version of this hoax, to the effect that Agenda 21 is a plan to use diabolical means like forest fires and laser beams from satellite and space to drive us out of our rural and suburban homes and into increasingly smaller, densely packed, overpopulated kill cities and smart cities in furtherance of the extinction of mankind. Note that this new, improved, and more sensation version of the hoax allowed Deborah Tavares to incorporate some of her other hoaxes to the effect that PG&E used directed energy weapons on satellites in space to start the recent fires in California, and that PG&E will use radiation from smart meters to kill us all in furtherance of the planned extinction of mankind, etc. Deborah Tavares has always known that Kaufman's simulated land use map was both wildly exaggerated and that it had nothing at all to do with Agenda 21 in the first place, much less with the United Nations using forest fires and laser beams from satellites in space to drive us out of our rural and suburban homes into increasingly smaller, densely packed, overpopulated kill cities and smart cities in the furtherance of the planned extinction of mankind. But Deborah Tavares nevertheless decided to lie about it in any way in order to incite fear, hatred, and violence against innocent Americans. So what's the conclusion on Agenda 21 the way Deborah Tavares tells it? The United States Senate rejected Agenda 21, so Agenda 21 is not a treaty, is not the law, is not enforced, and is completely irrelevant in the United States. Kaufman's wildly exaggerated simulated land use map had absolutely nothing to do with Agenda 21 in the first place. Kaufman's wildly exaggerated simulated land use map was based on all of the proposed land use regulations at the time, except for Agenda 21. The Wildlands Project, UN and U.S. Man and Biosphere Program, various heritage programs, etc. Kaufman created his wildly exaggerated simulated land use map as propaganda to generate opposition to the Biological Diversity Treaty, something different from Agenda 21, as I've shown you, which the United States Senate also rejected, by the way. The recent California fires did not advance the purpose of Agenda 21, to prevent the further deforestation. Indeed, the recent fires in California actually undermined the purpose of Agenda 21 by destroying the very forests that Agenda 21 was intended to protect. Therefore, the recent California fires were not Agenda 21 fires, even if they were a result of some other conspiracy. They are unrelated to Agenda 21. So whether or not there is a planned extinction of mankind, this document provides no support for that proposition at all. Snoop would like us to apply some critical thinking skills here. So, as Snoop says, if I were a charlatan, and if I wanted to create a better version of the Agenda 21 hoax, this is how I would do it. Number one, I would create videos and I would show the real, actual Agenda 21 document, unmodified, showing the Agenda 21 agenda as it is actually written in the official document, showing that its purpose is to protect the remaining forests, prevent drought, and ensure an adequate supply of fresh water uncontaminated by sewage, all of which is verifiably true. Then, in my videos, I would show written proof that the United States Senate rejected Agenda 21 and that it is not a treaty, is not the law, and is not enforced anywhere in the United States, all of which is also verifiably true. Then, in my videos, I would show all of the environmental catastrophes suffered by Californians since 1992, when Agenda 21 was first proposed and rejected by the United States Senate. Destruction of the remaining forests, increased drought, absence of fresh water, uncontaminated by sewage, people rendered homeless and displaced by forest fires, etc. Then, in my videos, I would claim that the refusal itself of the United States government to adopt Agenda 21 in 1992 constitutes conclusive proof that the United States government actually sought to purposefully destroy all the remaining forests in California, purposely increase droughts in California, and purposely destroy all supplies of fresh water in California not contaminated by sewage in order to purposely drive Californians out of their rural and suburban homes and into cities far away from the forests and wilderness areas. That would make a much better Agenda 21 hoax because, except for the nefarious intentions of the United States government's part, it is absolutely, positively, verifiably, and factually true in every single respect. That would make for a much more logical explanation for the environmental catastrophes suffered by Californians since 1992 than the story that Deborah Tavares peddles now, which actually contradicts the real purpose of Agenda 21, to protect those very forests from destruction in the first place. Let's apply a little more application of critical thinking skills. Fact. When corporate interests are threatened by proposed laws which would reduce their profits, they launch a public relations campaign against those purposed laws. But they do not admit that they actually oppose the proposed laws for reasons of their own selfish interests. Instead, they pretend that they oppose the proposed laws to protect the interests of society in general out of the goodness of their own hearts. For example, consider this hypothetical example as it relates to Agenda 21. Note this may not have ever occurred. It is only an example to illustrate this principle. If made into law, Agenda 21, a proposed law, would slow the rate at which logging and mining corporations and land developers like Deborah Tavares could destroy the remaining forests and thereby slow the rate at which they generate profits. So these corporate interests launch a public relations campaign against Agenda 21, but they do not admit that they actually oppose Agenda 21 to protect their own profits. Instead, they pretend to oppose Agenda 21 to protect the rest of society out of the goodness of their own hearts. So they come up with a carefully crafted lie intended to get the rest of society to oppose Agenda 21 as much as they do, instead of admitting that Agenda 21 would only slow down the rate at which logging and mining corporations and land developers like Deborah Tavares could destroy the remaining forest to generate profits. They falsely claim that Agenda 21 would actually work in the opposite direction. Specifically, they falsely claim that Agenda 21 would actually expand the forests and wilderness into areas that were already developed and already occupied by humans, thereby systematically driving homeowners out of their rural and suburban homes and into increasingly smaller, tightly packed, overpopulated cities, something that the real Agenda 21 would not have actually done. This fraudulent characterization of Agenda 21 would serve to make all the rest of society join with those who profit by destroying the forests. The rest of society would oppose Agenda 21 in the mistaken belief that they were saving their own homes in the process. Now that is a brilliant lie, but it gets even better. By telling such a lie, logging and mining corporations and real estate developers like Deborah Tavares could continue destroying the forests and continue to cash in without any opposition from the rest of society, while simultaneously blaming Agenda 21, which never became law in the first place, for the hardships that they themselves knowingly inflict on the rest of society by destroying the remaining forests in the pursuit of profits. Increased droughts and therefore increased forest fires, decreased fresh water supplies, uncontaminated by sewage, etc. Now that is a truly brilliant lie, blaming a suggestion that never became law for the hardships suffered by Californians, when the suggestion that never became law was actually designed and intended to prevent those very hardships from occurring in the first place. Remember, the foregoing is only an illustration of how corporate interests engage in disinformation campaigns in order to get society to oppose proposed laws that would reduce their profits. I do not know if Deborah Tavares lied to us about Agenda 21 for similar reasons. Ultimately, the reasons she lied to us about Agenda 21 are irrelevant. All that matters is that she lied to us. Thus, Deborah Tavares has again lied to us about what her documents say, in the same way that she lied to us about every other document she has ever used in support of her claims about the planned extinction of mankind.